All right. Good morning, everyone. I think we'll leave it a few minutes here for a few more people to log in so we can get started. Nobody misses anything, but we'll get rolling in about probably another minute or two here. Good, a couple more people straggling in here. Another 30 seconds and we'll get started. Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a pretty exciting and really pertinent topic to go over today. I just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items first. It's a fairly intensive program going to be put on by our friends today. So we're going to save all the questions to the end just to make sure we can get through all the information. So go ahead, throw any questions in the chat as we get going so we don't forget anything in the long run. And also, there will be a certificate of attendance for anyone here today that'll come from Odell and from Anne Maria sometime within the next week. So, yeah, as I mentioned, we do have an interesting topic today and pertinent to a lot of stuff, especially here on the Canadian side, talking about Legionella risk mitigation in cooling towers. And I'm excited to introduce our group today. So we've actually got a couple of our really key people from Tower Tech, a group I've had the pleasure of working with for almost 2 decades now, and really the center of expertise for anything cooling tower related. And as you're going to see on the Legionella side as well. So I'm going to start the introductions over with Micah Curtis. And Micah, I'm going to let you introduce the rest of your team and we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Micah Curtis, Tower Tech, Cooling Towers. I'm the sales director. I've been in the cooling tower industry for 32 years. To my right, maybe not on your right, is Brian Hobbs. He's a regional manager. He works with Odell and Matt, has been the regional manager for Canada. We sell a lot of cooling towers in Canada. Brian also has 35 plus years of experience in the cooling tower industry. Mohammed Haider, who is going to be our technical expert on this presentation, on this webinar, is the Tower Tech engineering manager. Mohammed has a fantastic background. Before he came on to Tower Tech, he actually was a owner operator of multiple cooling towers and has done multiple cooling tower replacements and operated cooling towers for a long time. So pleasure meeting you and the group. Thank you for all attending. Matt, Anna Maria, Odell, thanks for hosting this webinar. Fantastic. Should I share my screen now? Did everyone see my screen?
I see it.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. So we'll get going. We'll be very respectful of your time. We'll try to have this wrapped up with, at the end with some opportunity to ask questions, if applicable, in less than an hour. So as Matt mentioned, we are going to be talking about Legionnaire's disease in cooling towers, and we're really going to bring this around the back half of this presentation to 4 real design considerations for mitigating Legionella risk that can be implemented across most cooling tower manufacturers and can be implemented into specifications when you're buying new cooling tower equipment and or even upgrading existing cooling towers. So we'll keep moving and right on cue. So you've already done the introductions. There's the team. If you haven't seen our camera, there we're going to be talking about. So Muhammad, as a PE, brings a lot of experience, and we're excited to ask him some questions. I believe if you have questions, please note them, and we will answer them at the end. And we'll also be available after the hour if you want to stay on and ask questions. So we all work for Tower Tech. We promote sustainable efficiency across all different industries in the cooling tower industry. We're not going to talk much about Tower Tech specifically, maybe a little bit at the end. We're going to talk about cooling towers in general and how we can affect minimizing and mitigating Legionella risk. So this webinar, we're not going to discuss what's obvious, what many of you probably know or experts know, and we're not going to talk about what we say is non-negotiable, and that is we're not going to have to get into all the protocol, the certified licensed professional monitoring, the testing, the cleaning, controlling water chemistry, being very proactive per updated codes in Canada, all across the world, standards and the best practices for effective Legionella control. Oftentimes, your water treater, your water treatment are certainly the resident experts and have a lot of responsibility. So we're not going to talk about that part of it. Mohammed, what are we also not going to talk about specifically on this real briefly? What is this presentation not going to dive into, basically?
Yeah, so we're not going to dive into the general research and general consensus around Legionella. So Legionella, it is a disease that's well known in the medical industry. So there's a bunch of CDC specific guidelines to public proliferation of the disease that are not relevant to cooling towers. So we're going to try to stay very focused on cooling towers in general and the aspects of the industry that directly impact how an owner or operator would interact with the cooling tower and how that affects Legionella proliferation.
Yes, certainly. And then, of course, your local cooling tower IOM is going to have a lot of guidelines depending on the manufacturer on what should be done. But what we are going to talk about on this webinar is we're going to give you some Legionnaire's disease fast facts. Some of them may be basic on this high-level prezo, but we're going to talk about some facts about Legionella you may or may not know. Talk about a couple of the cases briefly. We want to talk about why are cooling towers cited as a source of Legionella. The cooling towers often have the proverbial finger pointed at them immediately. What factors are required for a Legionnaire's disease outbreak to occur? And then specifically, what are 4 design features that you as engineers, owners, maintenance people, whatever your role is at your company, your facility, your consulting firm, what can you do to influence the cooling tower selection and operation that minimizes Legionnaire's risk? And we're going to talk about 4 features that aren't exclusive to Tower Tech necessarily or any other manufacturer, but real world things you can do on the cooling tower design is what we're going to focus on to affect this. And that is something that we're going to give you some specific information on that. We're going to do a quick summary and then open it up to Q&A at the end. So these simple things that we talk about with Legionella outbreak, Legionnaire's outbreak, excuse me, they're often associated with cooling towers. You hear them about, in hot water, where there's a lot of hot water, hot tubs, stagnant water. We're going to focus on the cooling tower design. So, Mohammed, one thing oftentimes, you hear about a Legionnaire's outbreak and, we talk about the design, but what are we going to talk about that's under the surface and really is not maybe known, but not discussed and listed and practiced in the industry? What are some of those things?
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to go with is, the history of Legionella. I think Brian's going to give us a pretty good overview of, where Legionella came from and, how we know it today. And then we're going to talk about the factors that cause the spread of the disease. So on the surface is the disease itself and the symptoms of the disease itself. But, as the picture shows, an iceberg, there's a lot of factors that contribute to the disease, the spread of the disease itself. And finally, we're going to go over 4 methods that would control the actual design, that, design control we can do on cooling towers that is going to help us reduce the actual spread of the disease. So that's what we're going to be focused on, is the spread and mitigation.
Great. Brian, why don't you give us some fast facts about Legionnaire's disease, where it started, some general information for the group?
Sure. So, good morning, everyone. The first known or the first diagnosed case happened back in 1976 after American Legion meeting in Philadelphia. 130 people actually got sick from breathing in vapors they found out, and water vapor, and 25 people actually died. Nowadays, we hear about 5,000 cases reported annually in the US. It's really climbed. We kind of think that it's been going on longer than we've seen from 76, but the uptick has really started, especially in the US and Canada. We're seeing that. From what we've seen in the past, 1 in 10 who gets sick will die, and we've read earlier or in the last few months that's even gotten higher, up to maybe even 25%. So not everybody is going to get Legionnaire's disease. You have to be susceptible to getting Legionnaire's disease. People who have low immune systems or already have breathing difficulties or COP, things like that, are more susceptible to breathing in the particles of water and actually getting Legionella water. So we want to make sure that, we want to stay away from stagnant water systems and warm water systems as much as possible.
So thank you, Brian. A couple of quick little stories to this. So we actually have a Tower Tech rep from Georgia, and I believe he's retired now, but his name's Travis Glover Sr., and he was at this convention, believe it or not. And he got home after being at the convention, and on the news, he sees this big story about this outbreak and people dying, and he was totally healthy. And he went back and recollected outside of his hotel window at this convention was an old cooling tower, and it was nasty looking, green algae up and down the louvers. It was a very dirty, not maintained cooling tower. And Travis was a survivor. But it's interesting, that we actually had one of our reps at this convention, and the really, really fascinating thing to me, as I've learned about Legionnaire's disease, is in 2015, the Opera House Hotel in New York, some of you might recall that, they had a Legionnaire's outbreak at the Opera House Hotel, and 11 people died. And then they came in, shut down the cooling towers, quote unquote, disinfected it, turned it back on. 6 weeks later, the Legionella proliferated and went crazy again. During that time, another person died. I thought it was also an old cooling tower, like originally happened at the 76 American Legion convention. Come to find out, it was a 2-year-old cooling tower. We're not calling out any manufacturer by name. It was basically a brand new cooling tower, and it was not even necessarily not maintained well. So that opened my eyes and thought, wow, this is something to be taken seriously. And I wanted to mention that to the group. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an old, not maintained cooling tower. It can happen on new equipment very quickly. So, Mohammed, let's talk about some of the temps that Legionella bacteria starts to grow and proliferate and go crazy. What temperature ranges are we really looking at? What happens?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about Legionella is that the optimal temperature range, which we consider the sweet spot for growth of the actual bacteria itself, is around about 77 degrees Fahrenheit to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So anything below that 77 degrees Fahrenheit, the actual movement and growth of the bacteria itself slows down. And anything above that 120 degrees Fahrenheit, the bacteria begins to die because of harsh conditions. So those are the temperature ranges where it actually, is known to grow and proliferate. And, the interesting aspect about this is that cooling towers typically operate with warm water temperatures between about 85 to 100 degrees and cold water temperatures of about 70 to 85 degrees. And so one thing you'll notice with those numbers is that the overlap is almost exactly within the optimal growth range for Legionella, which is why we're having this conversation today. So yeah.
Okay. So talk about a few Legionella in the news. Frankly, if you go to AI or Google, there's too many cases to even keep up with anymore. But last year, New York, even after the 2015 Opera House Hotel crisis, New York has some of the most stringent testing and protocol procedures. Still dealing with Legionnaires outbreaks, even with these new protocols. Very concerning. To all our friends here in Canada, you may have heard of a cluster in Hamilton. We also had one in Toronto, Southeast Toronto had some cases. So maybe some of you have heard of those cases. Central Harlem had over 100 people sick and multiple deaths of a Legionella outbreak. We could go on and on talking about these cases and their root causes, and we're going to talk about some of that in a minute. But just want to bring this up. You're going to hear probably the next 90 days. You're hopefully not going to hear too much, but you're probably going to see on the news some Legionnaires outbreaks. So we felt like with the Odell Group, it's a very timely timely to talk about this. And hopefully the information we're going to share is going to help you mitigate some of the risk. What do you mean by the risk? Well, when people get sick and die, obviously, that's a public health risk. Take that very seriously. On the business side, which is less important, but nevertheless to be considered, every time there's a Legionnaire's death, it costs millions of dollars per occurrence, depending on the insurance carrier, depending on whether it's Canada, US, where it may be. But when there's a Legionella outbreak, Legionnaire's outbreak, and you can bet there's going to be lawsuits involved because most of the time it involved possibly some type of negligent behavior as far as monitoring, testing, cleaning. The one that I have on here, and I believe it's 10 or 12 years old, is the Vegas resort hit with Legionnaire's lawsuit. That was at a hotel called the Aria. If any of you have been to Las Vegas in the U.S., the Aria Hotel is next to the Cosmo. And I actually went to Vegas 2 days after this outbreak. And I was very nervous. I actually ended up booking a room on the other end of the strip to stay. But, it's something that is a public health concern, but it also costs a lot of money and to be taken extremely seriously in the industry. So, Muhammad, what does the CDC here in Atlanta? What do they say? What do they think about Legionnaires? Or is there really this growth spike, or are we just paying attention to it more than we have? Is that why the cases are growing? Shed some light on this for the group.
So the interesting aspect of this is that this data is relatively accurate. So there is a lot of awareness and heightened awareness to Legionella, especially after the situations and outbreaks that you mentioned. There's more government activity, more regulations regarding it. But one of the interesting aspects is that Legionella continues to grow and proliferate even despite increased awareness and increased regulations. And one of the reasons that Legionella continues to proliferate is not because we do not understand the disease and the bacteria itself. We have a very good understanding of the bacteria and the disease itself. But in reality, modern systems and operations are, conducive to the actual continued growth of Legionella itself. So that's one of the interesting aspects of this, is that the data is, very accurate, but modern systems favor Legionella growth. And, real quickly, it is unintentional, and despite better awareness and updated cooling tower designs, we still see outbreaks because the problems are more in operational systems rather than purely just design based, right? And in my experience, and especially with my history with cooling towers, and actually being an owner and operator, cooling towers are typically not considered a direct source of revenue. And because of that, they're not very high on the list when it comes to maintenance schedules and preventive maintenance. So because you're genuinely under maintaining a cooling tower and they're not cleaned, and they're typically run way past their life cycles, these factors all just end up contributing to helping actual Legionella growth. And it is a systemic, operational and I guess culture-based issue around cooling towers, as typically cooling towers are 2 steps removed from the actual product you're producing, right? So, in facilities that I've worked with in the past, cooling towers will be, cooling the compressors, and the compressors will then be, providing air to your system. So they're 2 steps removed typically.
For sure. So let's talk about cooling towers. Let's get into the details, into the weeds just a little bit. Why are they cited as a source? Talk about Muhammad. Basically, what is AI? What is science? What do they say? What is the finger pointing at? Why cooling towers?
Yeah, so cooling towers are, considered frequent source of Legionella outbreaks because they're considered to be biological incubators in the traditional sense of the word. And, as we discussed in operating temperatures, cooling towers typically operate with a warm water temperature of about 85 to 100 degrees, and a cold water temperature of about 70 to 85 degrees, which overlaps almost exactly with the optimal growth range of Legionella, interestingly enough. So the tower is intentionally maintained in the biological sweet spot for Legionella growth. And so that's why we consider them biological incubators and aerosolizers, in the sense that they create drift, which we're going to discuss later.
Okay. All right. Brian, we got some nasty looking pictures here. Let's talk about them from the bottom left corner. What are we looking at here?
Okay, so here we're looking at, one, a stagnant water source, which is most conventional cooling towers that have a large basin that's stagnant most of the time. Sunlight, as we know, all proliferates algae, so we got a lot of algae growth in this particular cooling tower. The incubator, again, we've got a cross flow induced draft cooling tower with a stainless steel base and galvanized walls, and we've got galvanization happening where the two dissimilar metals, along with the sunlight and the wind, dirt, and debris that's getting into the tower, becoming a very large food source for Legionella to breed in. And then the aerosolation of the high drift rates is because of the different types of cooling towers, especially the one on the left, the induced draft cross flow, and their drift eliminators do not stop all the water particles that are being produced. I know there's a lot of drift or a lot of plume coming out of the tower, top of the tower, but there's still a lot of aerosol water, and that's what people are actually breathing in on these high drift rates. And we'll get more into drift rates as we go through, because they're not all the same. There are some controls over this.
Now, someone that looked at one of these pictures, the bottom left, I would go, wow, that looks like a biodome for growing some algae, and looks pretty disgusting. But having myself, I think I've been in, I don't want to say thousands, hundreds of cooling towers through the years, maybe in over 1,000, but I've often seen this same situation going on in field-directed towers and even package towers. And you could almost say, man, you almost have an ideal greenhouse to grow some algae, maybe get some Legionella bacteria growing in a cooling tower setup. Drift drift on the right certainly is something that we're going to talk a lot more about here shortly. It's a big problem in the industry. Mohammed, what has to happen for Legionnaire's disease to occur? I believe you have to have a confluence of events for it to happen, correct?
That's correct. So there are going to be 6 required events that have to happen for Legionella disease to proliferate, which we're going to get into, here in the discussion. So yeah, so just to go right into that, the first item would be, an environmental reservoir, which cooling towers all have. And so the second item will be the multiplication of high cell counts, where you actually have the bacteria itself growing rapidly. The third item would be an actual mechanism to disseminate the bacteria, so spread the bacteria around a specified area. And the fourth aspect of it is that, the dissemination of the actual bacteria has to be of a actual virulent strand. So not all Legionella is considered virulent. So, and the fifth aspect is that the infection has to occur at a susceptible site on a host, and the host itself has to be successful as the sixth item. So these are the 6 events that are actually required for someone to get Legionnaire's disease.
Okay. Okay. And so talking about that, and what we're going to discuss here shortly is, of the 6 events, if you take one of those events, those things out of that equation, then the Legionnaire's disease does not occur. So what we're going to be focusing on here the next 15, 20 minutes is affecting the multiplication of these high cell counts. Most systems have maybe some level of Legionella bacteria in them. It's when they multiply and go crazy is when there becomes a problem in this equation. And then, of course, the mechanism to disseminate the bacteria. That's probably a fan of some sort blowing that drift into the environment near susceptible hosts. So if we can affect those 2 items, then you reduce, possibly eliminate the opportunity for Legionnaire's disease to occur. So looking at the pictures we shared earlier of the nasty cooling tower basin, I think it's pretty obvious to everybody that algae is one of the primary food sources for Legionella bacteria to grow. It's actually their number 1 food source. But there's actually number 2 and number 3 food sources that feed and breed Legionella bacteria. Brian, let's talk about what those are in cooling towers. The MSO Pocket Guide addresses those. What are they besides algae?
So besides algae, the Pocket Guide looks at biofilm that happens in the towers, scale, which is something you can greatly affect that can be minimized or even eliminated in some cooling towers. Corrosion being one of the number ones, especially in dissimilar metal type cooling towers, and Mohammed will get more into that. And then I guess in addition to that is all that sediment in those Legionella gardens that conventional cooling towers have in them, or all cooling towers of some types have.
So the interesting part about this that is often not thought about is corrosion. So in the markets we see a lot of times, you could buy different types of tower, but a tower might be purchased or spec that is not considered non-corrosive. If you think about corrosion relative to feeding Legionella bacteria, it's something that needs consideration and more thought. We're going to talk about that here shortly. So drift rate. The healthcare industry is very sensitive to drift. Drift is the water droplets that are blown out of the cooling tower, either the top or the side, that escape past the drift eliminators. And drift is often, people, don't like it. It's a consideration, but it's often minimized. I don't want to say it's ignored, but it's often minimized because it is a very small amount of water relative to the evaporation that occurs in the cooling tower. So it's a small amount of water relative to the flow rate through the tower. So it's looked at, but oftentimes not given as much consideration as it should be. We got some good examples of that for you, but certainly a nuisance. When we talk about drift, you talk about a lot of people are sensitive to it because the drift can eat paint off of cars in the parking lot. It can get on windows near downtown office setting, make the window cleaners' jobs very tough. Drift is a nuisance, corroding surrounding equipment and metal. So drift is a nuisance, but probably not given as much consideration as it should be in the industry. Can talk about that here shortly. So let's go back to feeding and breeding this bacteria. Mohammed, take us through scale and algal growth and corrosion in cooling towers. When I walk around, even Oklahoma City, where I live, or any city, you go look at a cooling tower and the picture on the top, you're probably going to see something similar occurring on the cooling tower. I'm going to say 90% plus of the cooling towers I come across, you're going to see something like this picture.
Yes.
Varying degrees, some cleaner than others, some of them completely clogged with scale and corrosion.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah. So, the first picture at the top, what you see is scale, which scale is just mineral deposits when, dissolved solids precipitate out of the water. So that's actual mineral deposits, such as calcium, from water that that precipitate out of the water. Below that, you see actual corrosion, which is metal degradation due to chemical reactions. So dissimilar metals, which we're going to get into a little bit later on, is actually using two different metals, you're essentially creating a galvanic cell between those two metals, which accelerates corrosion much more than you would if you have, for example, a uniform metal. So if you have just galvanized steel or just stainless steel, you would have much longer performance as opposed to mixing those two together. So a lot of the times when people have a cooling tower and they say, okay, well, the basin itself is going to be the most exposed to water. Let me make the basin stainless and the tower itself will just be galvanized. What you've done is you've actually created an anode and a cathode, which, on the galvanic scale creates a small battery, which essentially accelerates corrosion between the two metals. So dissimilar metals are a big no-no. And the interesting thing about scale and corrosion is that they don't just coexist with the actual bacteria. They actively create and protect an environment that allows the bacteria to grow. So that it allows the Legionella bacteria to grow. And that environment's created by scale and corrosion. So you really want to fight scale and corrosion. And I mean, as you can imagine, rough surfaces in general create attachment sites for the bacteria. So if you have a very smooth and polished and clean surface, the bacteria itself is not going to be able to attach or have an attachment site. But if you have a very rough surface, which is created by scale and corrosion, you're going to have a lot more issues. So to round that topic out, regarding algae and biofilm, as we know, cooling towers are open to the air and atmosphere, and cooling towers are actively pulling in air from the atmosphere. And so as they actively pull in air, they're pulling in organic particles, dust, pollen, and that's an exposure to sunlight is what is a direct cause of that. So you have these organic particles that are then exposed to sunlight, and that's a direct cause of algae growth. So that's the two aspects on that slide.
Yes, correct. So I think we look at cooling tower basins, and they really came to be accepted almost as a necessary evil. There's some things that can be done on them. But let's talk about briefly, Mohammed, the stagnant water basins and the corners of these basins and the chemicals from the water treater attacking all the bacteria in these sediment basins. What really happens out there in the industry?
Yeah, so anytime you have a stagnant water basin on a conventional cooling tower, um, and your water flow is not, it's not an active flow tower, it's not an active flow design, and your water starts pooling up in areas and not moving around. Anytime you have a situation like that, you're going to essentially be creating an environment which is very conducive to bacteria growth. And that's not only from the fact that the actual water in the basin, once it's in the basin, is starting to warm up. But it's also from the fact that in those stagnant zones, you start having a collection of dust, sand, organic particles, which is all, you know, areas that Legionella's bacteria is actually feeding on, right? So you have this nutrient-rich zone in a stagnant zone, which the bacteria then finds its way to, and then starts to proliferate a lot faster than you would want it to. So
So
that's a
in that,
direct result of stagnation.
yeah. So my comment on this is I spent first 15 years of my cooling tower life on the service side of cooling towers, much of it in the southern U.S. And there's a term that is still used called mucking the basin. Okay, real term. And what it meant one of two things. You drain the basin and you get shovels, and in these corners of these basins, the sediment would usually be built stacked up almost to the top of the basin, whether it's 4, 6, 8, 10 foot basin, or if you kept the water in, you hired a company and they would put on dive gear and they would go vacuum the basin. Almost like a very nasty job. If any of you have watched Dirty Jobs by Mike Rowe, cooling tower basin mucking would be at the top of the list. So a thankless, nasty job and a definite biohazard, especially relative to Legionella bacteria and potential proliferation of that bacteria causing
Yeah.
more problems. So,
Yeah.
um, cooling tower drift. Okay, and we're going to talk about drift here briefly in a little bit more, but 1,000-ton tower, Brian, how much drift are we talking about on a 1,000-ton nominal tower for the audience? Give that
So
for
on
some
a,
perspective.
okay, so on a nominal ton, 3,000 or 1,000 ton tower, 3,000 gallons a minute, over the course of a day, you're going to lose 200 to 216 gallons at a 0.005% drift rate, which is an ASHRAE standard for conventional cross flow induced draft cooling towers. So a lot of water droplets coming out of the top, as well if the wind is blowing in the right direction, will get some droplets picked up and blown out through the louvers in some cases as well. So that's a lot of water, 200 gallons a day.
200 gallons. So a 1,000-ton tower can emit 200 gallons a day. So uh, more than people think, because the point, here 0.005% is a small number compared to the actual cooling tower evaporation that would occur, probably between 1 and 2%, depending on the delta T, the system's designed for to evaporate. So let's get into the meat of what we want to talk about, and it's minimizing the risk with all this background information about Legionella and Legionella and cooling towers. Let's talk about some design influences that can be implemented in cooling towers across, I'm going to not say all, but most manufacturers. And let's get into the nitty gritty here of what we want to talk about. So, number one is talking about a influence that a choosing a cooling tower that minimizes algal growth or eliminates it. Algae's the most basic thing that feeds the Legionella. So, how can we do that, Mohammed?
Yeah, so the number one way to reduce algae growth is, recognizing that algae growth is a direct result of organic particles and their exposure to sunlight in warm water, so such as 70 to 100 degree Fahrenheit environment. So the number one thing you can do to reduce algae growth is to remove that sunlight from the equation. So if you have a tower that doesn't have an exposure to sunlight, then even if you have organic particles and the optimal temperature, you're not going to have algae growth because of that. So yeah, blocking sunlight in a tower.
Okay, pretty straightforward. Let's talk about the second influence.
Yeah, so the second design influence that you can, use to reduce the Legionella risk is to choose a non-corrosive tower design. So as we discussed, corrosion itself is metal degradation due to chemical reaction, particularly of dissimilar metals, but even, a standard metal. So galvanic towers, for example, the galvanized coating on a galvanic tower is actually zinc, whereas the internals are stainless, or the internal or carbon steel. So you have zinc and carbon steel. If you look at the galvanic charts, eventually you're going to get corrosion on that tower. It's not about uh, you know, it's not about a condition of, okay, let's maintain the tower. No, it's not an if, it's a when you get corrosion on the tower. So choosing a design that is fully resistant to that, that doesn't have dissimilar metals, so it's not galvanized plus stainless, or it's not just galvanized itself. You're either going to be going with a stainless steel tower, which will last a lot longer compared to galvanized, or you'll go with an FRP or some sort of polymer tower design, which are 100% corrosion resistant. So FRP, you're not going to get any corrosion at all because you don't have any metal in the system, and same with a polymer-based tower as well.
So, Brian, you work in the U.S. and Canada. Make a quick. What was your opinion of how many specs do you see that are just considering galvanized towers, or maybe a stainless basin with galvanized towers? What do you see out there in the industry, real briefly?
I see it's about 50-50. I see 50% that are just plain galvanized. And of course, closer to the coast and things like that, I see a mixture of stainless steel and galvanized cooling towers. So it's kind of split.
And what about FRP?
FRP, we see, here and there, we see a lot of specs that do spec out FRP or some kind of um, other type of material, whether it be FRP, but as long as it's not corrosive. And those aren't as many as we see in the galvanized or the hybrids that we see out there, the non-corrosive units.
Correct. So, to repeat what we talked about earlier, getting rid of corrosion and algae, if you get rid of algae and corrosion, you've eliminated the two food sources that Legionella bacteria thrive off of. So that's a big deal, choosing a non-corrosive cooling tower. Let's go into what I think is perhaps, well, I hate to say my favorite, but one of the most important factors that we can affect is what, Mohammed? What can we do here? How can we do this? Minimize drift.
Yeah. So design influence number 3, we're talking about drift. So reducing drift in a cooling tower. So what is drift, right? Drift is actually the droplets of water that are carried out by a high velocity airflow. So airflow in the opposite direction to a tower is what creates what you have as drift, which is actual droplets of water. So what you have on all towers are drift eliminators, which essentially force those droplets to then start taking sharp turns with the hopes of catching those droplets and forcing them back into the system. But drift eliminators are not 100% effective. So they do reduce a lot of drift, but typically they're not 100% effective. And I believe we're going to get on to the actual rates here.
So what is, Mohammed, what's an acceptable drift rate per Cooling Tower Institute?
Yeah, so CTI, which is the Cooling Tower Institute, typically the acceptable rates of towers for drift is 0.005, and some towers get down to 0.002, which is, typically the acceptable rates. Now, there are tower designs that can go much lower than that at a 0.0004, which is a substantially lower amount of drift. And when you get into those small numbers, that's when you're talking about drastically reducing the amount of water that you're proliferating into the surrounding environment. So if you do have Legionella in the system, which we've discussed, you almost always do, the lower your drift rate is, the significantly less amount of actual water you're putting into the surrounding environment.
Brian, this 1,000-ton tower we've been talking about, just as an example, walk us through this slide on what that means in numbers. We talked about 200 gallons a day, but a .0004 against a CTI accepted standard of .005. What does that mean in terms of water?
So I'm double or point double or 0004 to 0.005%. That's a big difference. As we spoke about earlier, the drift coming out of a conventional competitor's cooling tower is about 216 gallons a day. That's 78,000 gallons a year of water going up into the atmosphere. With a TowerTech cooling tower, because of our lower drift emission rates, we're at 17 gallons a day of drift coming out of the same size cooling tower. That's 72,000 gallons a year that we're actually saving the customer, but we're also not putting that vapor or the water droplets out into the atmosphere, therefore reducing the risk of Legionella into the atmosphere.
Yeah, so I have a swimming pool and it's about a 22,000 gallon pool. So when I think in terms of a swimming pool and dumping that, basically 4 of my swimming pools onto surrounding equipment or even, a sidewalk, that's a lot of water.
Yeah.
And I like this slide because it really brings attention to how much water you're talking about with a lower drift cooling tower. There's some cooling towers besides just TowerTechs that you can reduce the drift rate. Let's talk about that, Mohammed.
Yeah, so, and keep in mind, when we're talking about drift, we're talking about chemically treated water, which in some facilities is very heavily chemically treated water, which could be harmful to the skin. So we're not just talking about Legionella strictly in the sense we're talking about chemically treated water put into the surrounding environment. So you can have forced draft towers that have very, very low drift rates, and then we discussed the induced draft tower and their 0.002 to 0.05 drift rates. Now, one of the things you can do, especially with these induced draft towers, is that you can spec out a extra layer or different style of drift eliminators to potentially get a lower drift rate. Many claim that they can do it. You have to try to require it. You have to say that, hey, this is what we want. This is our drift requirement. We want a low drift rate because we're going to protect the surrounding environment. Yeah.
Absolutely. We'll keep moving here for time's sake. So minimizing drift is of the utmost importance. I think you all understand this message. So number 4, also important.
Yeah, so this item right here, design influence number 4, we're talking about basin sweeping systems. So in a standard conventional tower, you have a basin where the water gets stagnant. So one of the solutions that you get for those type of towers, which I've actually employed myself, are basin sweeping systems. And the interesting thing about that is that they essentially cause that basin to have an additional velocity of water that is designed to start stopping those stagnant zones of water. So it's better than nothing to have a basin sweeping system, but what you really want to have is a high velocity flow through basin or some sloped system to where that water has a natural high velocity. And the reason is, as you can see with the basin sweeper design and in my personal experience, you get zones either in and around or underneath the basin sweeper that'll start to accumulate to some high degree sediments and organic particles. And so, yeah, basin sweeper systems better than nothing, but still, adds another point of concern when it comes to the collection of organic particles that feed Legionella.
And really what we're talking about is trying to get rid of stagnant water, right?
Yep.
And that's back to the root core of the problem of cooling towers. So we're wrapping this up for you. We went through these four things. So some of these systems that have employed some of these improvements, not only do they minimize Legionella risk, they actually help save chemicals. They definitely reduce the bacteria count. These design features have worked, and they've been measured by chemical treatment companies. One customer that employed one of these basin and low drift designs employs over 50 of these style cooling towers. They had a big problem with Legionella proliferation, Legionnaires. It was a healthcare facility. They implemented some of these design features. All their cooling towers across, I believe, 13 different healthcare facilities have greatly reduced their risk. They actually wrote a case study about it. There's a testimonial we can send online where they talk about these factors that were implemented, and they really, really have eliminated their worry about Legionella proliferation, Legionnaires. Big deal. Another gentleman, Ed Block, MIT, runs a nuclear reactor, and Ed had a big concern about Legionella on his previous cooling towers. I believe he had some outbreaks, so he employed some of these features into his cooling tower selection, and Ed will tell you that blocking sunlight, getting rid of the algae, it's of the utmost important control in Legionella bacteria. So Ed is a great resource and testimonial to this technology actually works. We're at the end, so I'm going to get a little biased now. There's a cooling tower out there. And if you're with one of our competitors, you can drop out now, but I'm going to talk about Tower Tech just for a minute or two that incorporates all four of those features we talked about off the showroom floor, off the factory production line. The Tower Tech cooling tower mitigates Legionella risk by design. You don't have to put a special drift eliminator consideration. You don't have to put a sweeper into the tower. You don't have to worry about it growing algae. It comes minimizing Legionella risk. Here is a picture of the flow-through basin Muhammad referenced where the water moves actually. This is a cutaway through the basin, much like piping inside of a wall. You can't see it, touch it. The water actually moves and exits the tower at a high velocity, 5 to 7 feet per second, so there's no sediment buildup. The sediments are held in suspension in the water. The chemicals actually greatly mix and easily mix, and it definitely minimizes Legionella risk because of that. The Tower Tech tower does have any corrosive components. It's all pultruded FRP and stainless steel bolts. No galvy whatsoever. No dissimilar metals. Totally non-corrosive. So here's another shot of the flow-through basin. Mohammed, why don't you summarize everything, and we'll open it up to question and answers for the group.
Yeah, so a quick summary. Legionnaire's disease is definitely still on the rise. As the CDC chart shows, we know a lot more about it. We know the mitigation techniques, and yet we're still not able to get it under control as a society, which is why we're here today to try to do whatever we can to make sure that we talk about it more, just so that there's more awareness, right? Cooling towers continue to be a highly cited source when it comes to the proliferation of Legionella. We're trying to do our best to make sure that we promote designs that help reduce that. So, there is cooling tower technology that exists currently that can reduce the feeding, breeding, and spreading of Legionella. They are readily available. And then, there's many options in specifying, a traditional cooling tower design that can reduce the risk of Legionella as well. And so, keeping all these things in mind, we have to just realize that the at-risk and the high-risk population, such as near hospitals, nursing homes, retirement houses, those are, if you have any projects related to that, those need to be especially thought about when it comes to choosing a design that is going to help reduce the risk of Legionella in the surrounding area.
Thank you, Mohammed. Okay, that is the end of our webinar, and we will open it up to questions and answers for anyone in the room. Thank you.
And thank you very much, guys. Fantastic presentation. It's a lot of good information. And as you mentioned, I don't think this is coming up often enough as part of the discussion when it comes to the design timeline of most projects. It kind of gets discussed after the fact or way before the fact, but isn't often in the design room. And I think one of the biggest things is making sure people that are here today and as we spread this news, it's becoming more of part of the early conversation when design is happening, because that's the time to address all of it. So again, if any questions whatsoever, please jump on in. I will mention another interesting thing. Again, a little bit self-serving on the tower tech side of things, but one of the interesting parts too is that most of the facilities, especially I've worked at here in Ottawa, they have a Legionella mitigation protocol, right? And weekly they're dumping in chlorine or bleach, and sometimes they'll have when they do their weekly testing, they'll see not necessarily an outbreak, but a significant increase in bacterial load. So they'll in those things have a protocol where they start dumping in more and more chemicals to clean that up. And one of the things I always found interesting in discussing with my clients when dealing with this is that when you have a conventional material cooling tower, you're also significantly affecting the lifespan of that cooling tower. Again, business decision, that kind of goes in line with the operation of these cooling towers. When you dump, 50 gallons of bleach into a cooling tower and it's galvanized, you're significantly reducing the lifespan of that cooling tower. And I think it's really important to note that when you have an FRP cooling tower, that you're not going to have any of that worry. You could run that thing on bleach and you'd still be in a good position. So again, it's these death by 1,000 cuts as you go through the process of designing and owning a cooling tower, and all these things you put into play. These are some of the key pieces that really matter to the owners and operators as the years pass by.
100%. Thank you, Odell, and thank you, group, for listening in. And I'll end my commentary by saying that proud to have Odell as our representative, and Matthew and his team. Certainly, we have a lot of cool Tower Tech cooling towers that you can go visit if you want to see some of these features in action. Certainly, a design that's worth taking note of and giving serious consideration on your cooling tower if you have a replacement or new tower construction project.
Absolutely, and thank you guys for coming out and doing this presentation. And Micah's right on. We've got a lot of these in Ottawa, and Eastern Ontario, and in Toronto as well. And
Yes.
every single one of our clients is happy to have you out as a visitor to see these, because it really is a game-changing product to have on a building. So please, anytime if there's any questions, reach out to me. I don't think I did a good job of introducing myself at the beginning. Matt Edmonds, I'm with Odell up in Ottawa. But again, have been the kind of the guy overseeing everything Tower Tech and Odell. So any questions, you can always come back through me, or any of our people at Odell, but always happy to help. And anyone wants to see any of these in action, please reach out. We'll be happy to take you and run you through everything that there is to know and all the reasons why you love it.
Hey,
Perfect.
Matt
Well,
might invite people out to see Baby Tech here soon.
this is, yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. Thanks, Brian. So Tower Tech has a, we're going to call it a mobile cooling tower, that we're going to be bringing up all through most of our Ontario offices later in the summer. So you can see this thing both in action, and it's got a nice cutaway glass side too, so you can see actually what's happening inside one of the cooling towers. An interesting part about it is, because everything's so enclosed, when you see a regular cooling tower, you see a great box, and you don't see what's actually going on inside. This gives you a pretty good idea what's happening. So we'll everyone here is going to start to see invites as there's dates are now kind of locked down. So we're hoping you'll come out and see us in action with this one. Just checking the chat, see if there were any questions. I don't think so. So if there are no questions, just again, thank you everyone for coming out. Thank you, Tower Tech and Micah, Mohammed, Brian. Really appreciate you guys putting this on. And again, nothing stops. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll make sure we're setting you up with whatever answers we can get you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah, bye.